16. This is a pretty familiar section of Scripture. I think we've probably all heard this before, or lots of befores. But this is kind of where we're going to start, and not necessarily to look at this scene per se. Well, yeah, to look at this scene, but we're not going to stay here. I want to just kind of, this is just to kind of build what we're looking at. I want to read chapter 16, verses 13 through 20. Like I said, this is something you're all probably pretty familiar with. Verse 13, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But you," he asked them, "who do you say that I am?" I imagine here some silence. You know, just some kind of awkward, "I thought we were done, I thought we asked the question, we gave him some answers, yet he wants more." So, then after maybe an awkward pause, Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Then, I kind of picture there's some murmuring. You know, just kind of some discussion among themselves a little bit. Jesus responded, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will have been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will have been loosed in heaven." Then he gave the disciples orders to tell no one that he was the Messiah. That didn't go quite how I had planned that, did it? Oh, at the last one. That explains a lot. Okay, what I want you to think about, I want to hear from you. How does Peter feel right now? Jesus just says, who do people say? They give some good answers. Those would not be bad answers to New Testament Jews. And Peter says, "Well, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living." And Jesus gives him this answer. He says, "God, this is not, man didn't reveal this to you. This is from my Father." That's a great answer, Peter. In fact, on that confession that you just made, I'm going to build my church. How's Peter feel right now?
I feel pretty good about himself.
Pretty good about himself. Yeah, pretty proud.
It's probably some relief too, because he's just laid out a bombshell of a statement.
Yeah.
If there were any Pharisees in the group, he just put a big target on his back.
Oh yeah.
He's basically talking blasphemy.
Absolutely. He just said, "I'm confirming that you're the guy that is going to get this statement that is probably going to end up being super negative in our history, in our future, I guess."
What would Peter understand as the word church to mean?
Well, it would be the ecclesia. I'll build my group of called out people.
My group of called out people. So
Yeah.
for him, it's I'm going to build my following on that.
Yeah.
My following is going to be built on that statement. The other thing is, I wonder if Peter's confused, right? The on this rock, and Peter or Petra. Like,
Yeah.
Did he mean me? Did he mean what I said?
And
Like, I'm so confused now. Like, part of me thinks, okay, what does it mean to be called out? There's a little bit of something confused there, because we don't have this idea of church. We haven't seen churches before.
yeah, that the idea we think of church is not quite where they are.
And then is he talking about building it on me, or talking about the statement I just made? I think there might be a little bit of confusion. After all that's said and done, and everything's settled, and he's taking inventory of what happened that day.
Yeah,
He's probably like, can I ask a follow-up question?
that's a great point.
There's been a little confusion about that verse since.
Yeah. And I just imagine Peter, like you said, maybe a little bit, like Dana said, and you also, a little bit of, feels pretty good about it, a little apprehension, a little, I think I got that right. And, you know, and just waiting to see what happens. Okay, now then, let's keep reading. From then on, verse 21, Jesus began to point out to his disciples that it was necessary for him to go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders, chief priests, and scribes, to be killed and to be raised the third day. I'm not sure, we don't have any really indication how far away this is chronologically from what just happened. But it says from that time, so it seems like it kind of started right there. He begins to tell them, okay, you're right. Peter, what you said is right. I am the Christ. But because of that, I'm going to have to suffer and die and be raised. I'm going to have to suffer many things from the elders, chief priests, and scribes, be killed and be raised the third day. Peter took him aside. Now this kind of tells me that Peter feels like I got that one thing right the other day. We're pretty tight now. And really we get every indication, or a lot of indications, that Jesus and Peter are pretty tight anyway. So Peter takes him aside and begin to rebuke him. Oh no, Lord. This will never happen to you. Seems like a thing a friend would say, right? No, I don't. Now listen, we're never going to let that happen to you. This whole being suffer and kill, all that. No, listen, we're not going to let that happen to you. And Jesus turned and told Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me. You're setting your mind not on divine things or heavenly things, but on human things." Now then, I want you to, among yourselves, turn to the person next to you or around you or whatever. And talk about this for just a minute. What does Peter think right now? Talk amongst yourselves. And while you're thinking of talking about this, think about this. For 2 years at least, he's traveled with Jesus. He's heard the teachings. He's seen the giant crowds. He's seen the crowds diminish. He's never left. And he makes this bold statement recently. You're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, you're right, Peter. And then this. So where is Peter now? All right, any thoughts?
Well, I think he's humble. You know, he initially has the presumption of rebuking Jesus.
Yeah. And he gets the legs kicked out from under him. He's humbled, for sure. Yeah, the audacity. I mean, the fact that the text even says he began to rebuke him. Now listen, Jesus. It's like, what? What else?
There is that boldness that he has right now. He's very confident right now.
Yeah.
Jesus has just made this statement, and so he's got this confidence going. And it's funny that, like, it's not in red, but it says what Jesus was telling them is that he was going to suffer and he was going to be persecuted by the chief priests and scribes and be killed. And so I think right there, and be killed, that's probably the last thing that Peter heard.
Yeah.
He didn't hear what he said next, which is, and be raised up on the third day.
That's a great point.
He was just ignoring that. If I was, I shouldn't say if I was, because I don't know what I would have done.
Yeah.
Anything different than what Peter did, but it's almost like he had blinders on, and all they cared about was protecting Jesus.
Yeah.
And he's going, I can do that. I can be so bold as to say to Jesus right here now, Jesus, I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen, and I'll bet my life on that. What he didn't do is recognize that Jesus was going, hey, there's also going to be this great thing that's going to happen. And if you consider that, stop there and think about that, Peter, you might stand back and go, wait a second, maybe we should kind of see what's going on here.
Yeah, it's this part. It's that you're not thinking about things where I am.
I think the really cliche thing to say is like Peter's, thinks before or speaks before he thinks, which for sure. But also like I think Peter also just, I think from what we see for the most part, typically he has the best of intentions. I think.
Yeah.
Like,
It was noble.
I don't think he's like I don't think he's operating on a selfish level. I think like what was being said, he's really looking out for what he believes is the well-being of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
But then also like I pure intention, a well-intentioned statement, and then to the next, just be called Satan right after that, I'd be like, what, wait, what? Like,
Yeah, exactly.
what?
What'd you say? I have in my notes, Peter might have thought, why do I always speak up? Dana and then John, then Eric.
This is really a relationship breaking statement.
Yeah.
Because you come out and say, I'm with you all the way, I'll die for you. Get behind me, Satan. Yeah. What just happened? And,
Yeah.
You know, it's a voluntary giving. You know, Peter doesn't have to stick around.
Exactly, and that's what I'm saying. Peter has to be thinking, I've been here, man. You look at all the people that have left. I stayed, and now I'm Satan.
I think this whole interaction shows, like, you talk how tight, how close they think they are,
Mm-hmm.
because Jesus says that you're a stumbling block, a hindrance to me. That obviously means that he trusts and takes into account what Peter says as well.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like that could be a temptation to him,
Yeah, that's
because he's bringing that up in a private setting. And I think if you're a close friend, you can be frank with one another, and that's another reason why Jesus is so, like, blunt,
yeah.
because they're a close relationship.
I think that's a great point. That could be Jesus going, whoa, whoa, whoa. You're my buddy now. Don't do that.
Piggybacking on what Dana said, like earlier, he makes that confession, and he's, praised for it. It's probably on a high for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and then this happens, and to Dana's point, like, Peter could leave, like, that could really fracture the relationship, like, how he handles this going forward is really an interesting thing.
Yeah, it could be very deflating. Zach.
Yeah, I think like this is, it's important that this is placed on the heels of like Peter's high moment.
Mm-hmm.
Because Peter's high moment was him thinking, oh, like the whole Petra thing, like I'm the rock that we're building this like gathering.
Yeah.
He's thinking like rebellion. He's thinking like
Yeah, it could
kingdom.
possibly be.
And this is also on the heels, like John was saying, of the temptation of Christ, where Satan tempted him with this idea of like ruling over the kingdom.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of like a callback, I think, for Jesus, where it's like, yeah, I know that, like, duh, Peter, I know that this is a thing that could be where I'm like a ruler and, we're upsetting Rome.
Mhm.
But like, Jesus is thinking on other things. And now I think this causes Peter to have like oh wait, I was totally misunderstanding what was about to happen.
Yeah, I mean, we have to realize, I think we have to acknowledge that Jesus has got to have that in his mind kind of the whole time. That, this is what they expect, this is kind of, this is what I could do. I'm not saying that it would be a temptation, but we know the garden prayer. We know the point he got to where he said, if there's any other way. Did you ever hear that?
Yeah, he had scripture to back up on, and look at David, when his men saw him getting too close to the action, they're like, hey, you're the light of Israel.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
We don't want you extinguished. And how would you not have that same opinion with Jesus?
Yeah.
The light of the world.
Yeah, there's everything about that with Peter, his statement, especially when you go back to that, you're Peter, I'll build my church. It's a natural thing for him to want to say. It seems to flow.
When I think of when Jesus asked, but you, he asked them, who do you say I am? I've always interpreted that as this is Jesus testing his disciples.
Yeah.
Did Peter feel like this was a test, or was this more like you ever come home from work and you talk to your spouse, like, what am I doing in this place? I'm not, like, I don't feel like this is my purpose, like, what am I doing here?
Time for Peter to make an
Yeah.
assessment.
Time for me to make a change. And when I think about that question in that light of Jesus is scratching his head and he's like, what am I doing here? Who do you think I am? And when Peter tells him you're the Messiah and Jesus says, my Father revealed that to you.
Yeah.
I think that instills in Peter, hey, I'm actually being helpful to the master.
Yeah.
Like in this time, and I don't think Jesus is doubting himself. I think it's one way we could read that. But if it is that, if you choose to say that this is Jesus asking for confirmation, maybe he's got a little doubt in himself, and Peter speaks up, says, you're the Messiah, and Jesus says, my Father revealed that to you. I see Peter as, man, I'm really helping Messiah.
Yeah.
And so like Zach said, it's coming from a place of honest help and trying to encourage and thinking, okay, maybe this is the same sort of situation where he's just being down on himself.
Yeah. Or I need to step in.
I need to step in and encourage him.
Yeah, I don't doubt Peter's sincerity or his genuine desire to help Jesus, but that's Jesus' answer.
But in the same breath, Peter is mentioned with God and with Satan,
Yeah,
right? And it's almost like whiplash. You
Yeah.
go from like one end of the extreme to Jesus, the Master, has put my name alongside Yahweh, the Father,
mhm.
and then, and from our perspective, a few verses later, he whips you over to being in the same breath with Satan.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying is that it would really help my point if it was said this was the next day or that afternoon, but we don't know how long it is. But it does. It seems like such a quick transition from the high to the low. Okay, let's switch gears. Keep that in mind, but let's switch gears. What's your catchphrase? What is it that you say? A lot of parents, you got to admit this. I don't want to do that. Well, luckily you don't. I didn't ask you if you wanted to. Anybody have a catchphrase?
Asked and answered.
What'd you say?
Asked and answered.
Asked and answered.
Asked and answered. When your kid asks you to do something a second time, you say, asked and answered. You've already asked, I've already answered, don't ask me.
Yeah, somebody else?
Not my fault.
It's not my fault. Don't ask me about that.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. You see it like on license plates. You see like somebody's license plate will say police or whatever, and it's like, okay, that must be the thing that person says.
Anytime we like left the house to go play outside or do anything, my parents would always say, "Remember who you belong to."
Yeah, those little. I mean, not all those phrases are. I mean, some of them are very helpful.
My mom always says, "It'll be fine."
It'll be fine. Yeah, it'll be fine. We'll work it out. It'll be fine.
When I was a little kid and I was more interested in what my brother was doing for getting in trouble than what I did get in trouble, and my dad would say, "You worry about your own little red wagon."
You worry about your own little red wagon. We develop those, right? We have those things that we say more than once. We say them fairly often, and it kind of becomes who we. I know when I preach, when I teach, I say "like I said" too much, and I go back and listen to them. I'm like, why do I say that every 7 phrases? But I mean, there's those little things that become the things that we say. What's Jesus's catchphrase? You think of anything Jesus says a lot?
Kingdom of heaven.
Kingdom of heaven, yep.
It is written.
It is written.
Just like listen, or just like
Yeah, listen.
hear me, or listen. Anybody who has ears, let them hear.
Yeah, truly, truly, the verily, verily, those kind of things.
You've heard it said.
Yeah, you've heard it said, but I say. Think about that in that context. Or think about that idea of what does Jesus say a lot? And just before we keep going with that, let me ask you for another definition. What is self-denial? I mean, it doesn't have to be a spiritual answer, just in general. What does it mean to deny yourself?
Surrender.
Surrender?
Go against your desires.
Go against your desires, yeah.
Refuse.
Refuse. Self-control. Self-discipline. Some of those kind of things. Okay. Let's think about this. When we think about the things that Jesus says often, or the things that are repeated, you know, the Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the synoptic gospels. John isn't considered synoptic. They tell the same story, little different ways. Lots of stuff you find in Luke isn't in Matthew or Mark. A lot of stuff you find in one or the other isn't in the others. John comes from a completely different perspective, it seems like. One thing that we find in all 4 Gospels is what happens next, back in Matthew chapter 16. We've had Peter stand there and say, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus gives him a pat on the back. A little bit later, Peter says, "Okay, listen, we're not going to let that happen to you." Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan. You're being a stumbling block. You're being a hindrance to me." Go back to Matthew 16 and let's keep reading. verse 24. Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone wants to follow after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life because of me will find it." In all 4 Gospels, 7 times total, in some different wording, but this seems to be Jesus' focus. This seems to be something that the Holy Spirit inspired these writers to record to the point that this is not going to be left out. In fact, we're going to repeat it. John's phrasing is a little different. There's a little different nuance. But in all 4 Gospels, we see Jesus say, if you want to really be a disciple, here are the steps. Self-denial, take up a cross, and follow me. So, if this is in fact, and I'm telling you my opinion, it seems that this is Jesus' core statement. This is super important, at least. It seems that Jesus says self-denial is the key of true discipleship. Putting what I want aside. Now, what we'll talk about for this week and some of next week, I think, is that can't be our only focus. And that seems like a dichotomy. That seems like 2 things that you can't put together. But give me a minute to get there. Then the idea of take up your cross. Let's get rid of the idea of the cliche of that's my cross to bear. Your personal burden, the problem you have in your life, the situation you have to... That's not what Jesus is talking about. I think we know that Jesus isn't saying, take up your cross. Your cross to bear may be that you got to drive 45 minutes to work every day. That's not what he's talking about. When Jesus talks about taking up your cross, his listeners would have understood, and we've talked about this before, I think, even in here. His listeners would have understood he's talking about a place to die. Deny yourself, take up your cross, be willing to let yourself die, and follow me. Now, follow me seems like the clearest, the easiest part of this statement, right? He says, if you want to come after me, if you want to follow me, follow me. That's how it ends. If you want to come after me, do these, and then come after me. So there's got to be something else he's saying there, or he's just being repetitive. The whole idea of self-denial doesn't mean anything if you're not turning your life over to Jesus. If you're not going all in for Jesus. I believe this is the hardest thing for Christians today in our culture. Sorry, this is terrible, but it's easy to show up at church. It's easy. It's a little harder to come to Bible class. It's hard to get somewhere at 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning. But really, that's the easiest thing we do. Now, if you come back Sunday night, come back Wednesday night, there's another layer of challenges. But it's the easiest thing we do. What Jesus is talking about here, obviously in this, he talked to Peter about build my church. He didn't say, if you want to come after me, you'll go to church. You'll go to this thing I'm going to establish with Peter. That's not what he's saying. So, when we look at this, the fact that we consider this as 7 different times in the Gospels, Jesus says some version of this statement. This is what we're building this quarter on. Because this is obviously important to Jesus. If you want to come after me, there's some things you have to do, and then you just got to follow. Galatians 2:20. You know this one. What does Galatians 2:20 say?
I'm crucified with Christ.
There we go. I'm crucified. I've been crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, and this is one of the verses, no matter what Bible I read it from, I cannot help but quote it, how the song was, which I think is NIV. I haven't used NIV in years. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. In the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Okay, now what does that mean? That's hard, huh?
No longer
lives in me. It's the renewal, the changing from being the one, Christ is the one.
From being me to being him.
Basically, the end result of this.
That's exactly, I'm not going to take any more answers because that's exactly it. This is what our author will call Christ realization. It is that from self-denial is one part of it. Christ realization is the other part. Self-denial is that take up your cross. Deny yourself. I'm not going to be this anymore. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to whatever. But what we have to understand as Christians is what we're to be is not just people who don't do some stuff. Right? It isn't just we don't do this, we don't do that, we don't do this, we don't do that. That's self-denial. But we can't stay, that's not life. It's this idea. That's the take up your cross, there you're dead, and follow. That's the point that we're going to try to get to, is the idea of follow. You know the expression, that's the crux of the matter? What does that mean? What's that? The heart of the matter?
Bottom line, intersection.
The bottom line, the intersection. Crux is the word cross. That's super interesting to me. That we use an expression that says that's the crux of, it means that's the focal point. That's the most important thing. That's the heart of what we're talking about. And it's based on the word cross. That's the heart. That's what we'll talk about this next week. But the idea of the centrality of the cross and what all that means. Now, as Jeremy pointed out, what Peter doesn't seem to hear, and it seems like these guys don't hear this for a while, the whole, I'm going to be crucified and be killed and all that, but then I'm going to raise the third day. The cross to us should also remind us of that there's a cross that Jesus died on, but he didn't stay dead. That there was a new life after that. So when we think of this idea of denial, give me a antonym, is that opposite?
Yes.
English teacher? Yeah, antonym. Give me an antonym of denial. I forgot which word to say there.
Indulgence.
Indulgence? Ooh, good.
Is it, I can't remember, antinomianism, that's where mob rule or just,
Antinomianism is against the law.
yeah, so, where there's no boundaries to worry.
Okay, yeah, so the opposite, okay. What's another opposite, what's an opposite word of denial?
Self-interest.
Self-interest. Okay, turn back to Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10, Jesus is talking to the 12 again. And this seems to be before it, but it in Matthew's gospel it's before. This seems to be, and I don't. Well, never mind. Doesn't matter. Here it is. Verse 32. Therefore, okay, he's talking about God's going to take care of you. God takes care of sparrows. God takes care of all this other stuff. Even the hairs of your head have all been counted, so don't be afraid. You're worth more than many sparrows. Verse 32, therefore, whoever will, what does your version say? Acknowledge. Any other things? Confess. Whoever will acknowledge or confess me before others, I will also confess or acknowledge him before my Father in heaven. But whoever does what? Denies me before men, I will also deny before my Father. So an opposite of denial, or an opposite of denial could be confess or acknowledge. That's interesting. And remember that. And I gotta hurry. To own Christ means to disown self. So step one means saying no to self. Because what we're saying is, it's not about me anymore. That's what you said. It's not me. anymore. It's Jesus now. It's more about saying, and this is what I want. This is what I want us to get across this quarter, specifically these first 2 weeks. Is our life is not just saying no to self. It is saying absolutely yes to Jesus. It's saying absolutely yes to this life. Because, I mean, we'll see that in a minute, maybe. But I mean, and Jesus, here I wrote this down too. Jesus never said act like a Christian. He said die. He said change your life completely. Give it all over to me. Philippians 1:21. Here's what Paul says. Now, okay, we're going to look at Paul for just a minute. Bear in mind, Peter is in the moment, right? Jesus asked Peter these questions, makes these statements. Peter's right there going, bleh, you know, and then he goes, oh, wow, I can't believe I said that. And that's just kind of what happened. Paul's had some years to think about it. Paul's had some years to pen some eloquent words. Philippians 1:21. Paul says this, for me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Going back to what Brad said with Jesus' statement, this is Paul's answer to that. Galatians 2:20 is Paul's answer to that. But this is another way where Paul says, I get it. I get the whole take up your cross and follow me. Deny yourself. Take up your cross and follow me. You look back at Matthew 16:24, where Jesus makes that statement. And then let's compare it, not just to Philippians 1:21, but let's go back to Galatians 2:20. Think about what Paul says there. This seems to be Paul's answer, Paul's response to Jesus' statement, just like Brad said. He ruined this whole slide for me. But that's what it seems. It seems like this is Paul thinking about what Jesus has said. And I don't know, I'm just this supposition, but that Paul has had time to stew on this and think about this, and he comes to the conclusion, it is, for me to live is Christ. To die is gain, because I remember that Jesus said that. And then he says, Galatians 2:20, okay, here it is. In a nutshell, I've been crucified with you. You can imagine almost a dialogue. Jesus says, take up your cross. Paul says, I've been crucified right there with you. I'm crucified with Christ, co-crucified. The Greek word literally is co-crucified. That's so cool. Then Jesus says, and you follow me. He says, that's give your life over. Paul says, it's not even me who lives anymore. It's Christ who lives in me. I'm a puppet. I am animated by the Spirit of Jesus. I mean, that's basically what he's saying here.
The way I've always read the verse 24, when he says, if anyone wants to come after me and take this cross, deny himself, follow after me. Well, he's basically saying, either I already have done these things, or I'm preparing to do these things. I'm going to deny myself. I'm going to take up the cross. Now it's your turn to follow me.
Absolutely.
And earlier, I don't know if, is it just, at least in my translation, it says, he began to point out to his disciples that it was necessary for him to go to Jerusalem and suffer many things. I don't know if he specifically said that he was going to die on a cross or anything.
Yeah.
But maybe later on when Paul writes this, he like now sees because he knows the ending.
Yeah.
Now it's like kind of making more sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul has the advantage of looking back at it. When Jesus says, I'm going to suffer and be killed, the whole cross thing comes in, and that's a good point, because when Jesus says, take up your cross, he said, be killed, and then he says, take up your cross. At that point, I think the apostles may be going, I wonder what he's saying here with the whole cross thing.
It's an interesting juxtaposition that he comes to him early on, and after Jesus talks to the disciples and says, take, eat my body, everybody leaves except the core group, and he says, aren't you guys going to go?
Yeah.
Where are we going to go? You have the words of life.
Yeah.
And Jesus turns around and says, okay, march to your death.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the contrast Jesus makes over, and we'll look at that, in fact, a little bit next week. That's anytime Jesus talks about life and giving up, I mean, if anyone wants to save his life, you're going to lose it. If anyone's willing to lose his life for my sake, he'll keep it. It's that contrast that Jesus makes over and over. You know what else is in? Oh, yes,
Another
sir.
parallel to this is Philippians 2:5. Have this mind in you.
Yeah. Think like Jesus.
Yeah.
Think like Jesus thought. You know what else is in all four Gospels? Jesus' birth isn't in all four Gospels. You know what else is? Peter's denial. What a drag for poor Peter. It's like, you know, if there were spin doctors, if the New Testament, they could have gotten together and went, oh, let's leave that out. This is the guy that Jesus just said, on this rock, on this confession, I'm going to build my church. And we have this written about him in all 4 Gospels. Why is that? Why do you think it matters? Why do you think that matters enough to be in all 4? Okay, I'm just going to tell you. Because I think it shows us that if he can, anybody can. Because this is hard. If Peter can look right in the face of Jesus hours before and try and pull a sword and defend him, risking his own life, and then hours later say, I don't even know the guy. This is the guy that Jesus just said, on this rock I'm going to build my church. We have to be aware of this. That this Christ denial in our lives is possible. We have to embrace this idea of Christ realization. Peter, here's another, I'm just going to tell you this. Peter goes from I don't know him to he's the only one I know. Acts chapter 4 verse 12. Acts chapter 4 verse 30, sorry. There's no other name on heaven and earth that can save us but Jesus. He goes from one extreme to the other because he embraces the idea of Christ realization. Luke, in his account of this, provides us one more word. When Jesus says, take up your cross, one more word, Luke provides the word daily. This is not a one-time deal. I'm afraid we have kind of inadvertently taught that. Repent and be baptized. Hear, believe, repent, confess, be baptized. And once you're immersed in water, then you're all in. That's true in its essence. But this whole idea of take up your cross, Luke says, is a daily deal. We have to be ready to do this day in and day out. That's the challenge with it. I mean, that's what hurts us with this. Have you ever been driving down the road? Worst time I ever did this was, I always remember this, was the first time I ever heard a Jack FM was in Denver. When we were in Denver going to Bear Valley. They just got one there. I heard like Prince followed by, Def Leppard followed by Metallica. It was like, they play everything. And I was like, this is just so cool. And it helped me on my drive to school each morning. And I was sitting at this one intersection, I don't remember what it was, but big intersection. And I'm just singing along. I think it was She Drives Me Crazy, if I'm going to be honest with you. And I wasn't even thinking, have you ever done that? Singing at a stoplight? Are you embarrassed? I mean, if you're just sitting there in your car, nobody sees you. You're not embarrassed. You're just like, you're up on stage, you can just imagine the lights. I catch myself pointing to the crowd. I'm in concert. But then I look over and there's somebody sitting next to me in the other left turn, there's this dual left turn lanes. And dude's looking right at me going, why was I so into it? Because I was, in the moment, I was absorbed. That's what Christ realization is. I'm so into this thing. I am so Christ realized, denied self, dead to self, that I don't care. I'm absorbed by who Jesus is. It's Christ living in me. And that's all right. That's where we'll pick up next week also. We'll talk more about this idea of what the cross means to us and all its ugliness and all its beauty. Any thoughts? Okay.